practice. The prioritisation systems, the metrics and the accounting systems are aligned with IFC Performance Standard 6. Government policies, the Australian federal government has just released their offsets calculator, which is, by chance, it seems very similar to the system we've developed. The BBOP systems, key biodiversity areas, and in fact, systematic conservation planning. Now, Tom is going to talk about verification of this process by external groups. Thanks.
Thanks very much, John and Stuart. Thanks everyone for coming. Now that John has had a negative impact on the time budget of this session, I'll endeavour to catch up. I'm Tom Brooks. I head the science team at NatureServe, an IUCN member, and I'm a member of 3 IUCN commissions. Brief background here. So as you've heard, in 2004, Rio established its voluntary commitment for its operations to have a net positive impact on biodiversity by the time of closure in 2004. Over the subsequent 5 or 6 years, a lot of effort went on through the corporation, both building their staff capacity towards implementing this commitment and establishing consultancies and partnerships with many non-governmental organisations towards putting this commitment into effect. However, us biodiversity conservationists are suspicious bastards, and while Rio's commitment was met with considerable excitement, there were also a number of raised eyebrows. So with that in mind, in 2010, Rio Tinto and IUCN established a collaboration, one of the components of which is to develop a mechanism, to develop a protocol and a process to allow independent external review of the progress of Rio's operations towards having a net positive impact on biodiversity. We heard from Stuart the benefits. So what's in it for a mining company, for Rio Tinto, to make a net positive impact commitment and to engage with IUCN in its review. But let's have a quick think from a high level, from the perspective of IUCN, or actually more broadly from the perspective of conservation in general. What the benefits are for biodiversity conservation of getting involved in this process, and also have a think about some of the risks or challenges we will face. Firstly, there's a very neat fit here, in which the unusual, in fact the unique and rather Byzantine structure of IUCN actually provides a very good fit to bring to bear the kinds of components necessary for this kind of review. We have through the membership of IUCN across 1,200 institutions worldwide, we have the legitimacy to carry out this kind of review. Through the commissions, we have the scientific expertise, and through the secretariat, we have the convening power and coordination. Obviously, there's also the potential, if net positive impact is being delivered, then that is delivering, by definition, delivering conservation gains, delivering biodiversity conservation. There's clearly a potential, as we heard earlier, and we'll hear more on the panel, for scaling this commitment to others in the private sector, other corporations, and potentially also public sector institutions, and building the learning environment and the momentum towards regulation for net positive impact. We need to be clear as well, though, that there are a number of risks and challenges to the process. As we discussed in the session on biodiversity offsets specifically the other evening, we know that there are still a number of scientific questions remaining around the implementation and delivery of restoration and offsets, questions of additionality still to be resolved in particular, also some permanence questions. thinking about long timescales, it's also very important to be thinking about this collaboration over a long time frame. Mining operations often last for more than 100 years. If this process is going to be a realistic one, it has to be one that has a long-term commitment to it from both institutions. And clearly, when it comes to the question of convening review panels to implement a scientific protocol, the process for convening those panels has to be beyond reproach. It has to be absolutely, absolutely transparent and absolutely clear. Thinking about panels, so to start to develop this mechanism for developing a protocol and a process for net positive impact review, over the last 4 years we've convened a team. The Business and Biodiversity program in the IUCN program convened a team of 14 people to develop this protocol and process. I won't go through people individually, but a couple of principles in how the team was convened. First of all, it was drawn from people who have had active engagement at the interface between biodiversity conservation and private sector issues, specifically mining issues. We went to lengths to draw from a broad geographic span of individuals, people coming from all of the world's continents on the team. Also broad institutional participation from different kinds of institutions, different IUCN members, intergovernmental organizations, institutions with different governance models. And also, I should add, from the Rio Tinto side, from Rio Tinto operations involved in different kinds of mining and in different places in the world. Also, strive there for gender balance across the team. And I should also credit that two other people who were heavily involved in the early stages here, Monica Harris from WCMC and Dennis Hozak from IUCN. Were very important in pulling the team together. Our activities to date, we've been working on, first and foremost, on developing this protocol. That's involved a number of meetings by teleconference and in person. Some of those were pre-pilot meetings actually at Rio Tinto mining operations to make sure that the kind of protocol that we were developing would be fit for purpose. And then just 3 weeks ago, we've come from a first actual pilot application of the protocol at the Dampier salt operations in Western Australia. So what does this protocol look like? It's essentially a series of structured questions to guide the review team through the review of the degree to which the documentation of commitment to documentation of progress towards having a net positive impact is being achieved. There are two stages to it: extensive review through desk study, both regarding the adequacy of the net positive impact forecast and the associated documentation, the Biodiversity Action Plan, which Stuart described, and the appropriateness of the targets and actions and documentation of progress towards them. That's work before going to the site. Then on the site there are three further steps which will have increasing importance over time, over repeat stages in the review process. Consideration of the adequacy of the process necessary to achieve MPI. Consideration of the sufficiency of monitoring that's in place to document that. And then finally and ultimately, of course, consideration of the overall progress towards having a net positive impact. While the net positive impact review protocol is necessarily a very lengthy piece of work, the proposed review report would be a very crisp and slim piece. Very important to incorporate the metadata here, who was involved in the review, when was it done, a brief introduction, overall impressions, and then really the key of the report is anticipated as being 2 sections of short reports against findings and against observations more generally as to progress towards having a net positive impact. Challenges to the process. There are sets of questions around equivalency of biodiversity, ways and scope to which invertebrate and fungal and poorly known biodiversity generally should be incorporated. There are some discussions underway with some of the invertebrate and other subcommittees in the Species Survival Commission to help to provide some guidance for that. There are some serious questions of scalability regarding how fast and how many operations can be reviewed by IUCN through this kind of process. And then actually maybe most critically, there's going to be some key work to do for IUCN to walk this fine line between balancing national and local legitimacy with technical capacity in NPI review. Going forward into the final, into the next quadrennium here. So first and foremost, we plan a couple of further pilot studies, which will then lead to publication of version 1 of the protocol itself. Once that's published and available, then we'll have some work to do to refine this question of how fast NPI reviews can be undertaken, how many can be undertaken in a given year. That will be particularly important if the process is being extended to other corporations beyond Rio Tinto or other institutions. And then as the quadrennium moves forward, we'll be able to develop some kinds of mechanisms to help to strengthen the balance between legitimacy and credibility in the process. Maybe mechanisms to establish training courses, maybe mechanisms to establish a global roster of specialists, ways to draw from IUCN national committees, and other possible processes. Overall, we see a really important opportunity here for potentially transformational change to conservation. The potential to harness really the unique structure of IUCN, this combination of credibility, legitimacy and convening power, to provide value to an economic, to an industrial operation. In this case it's Rio Tinto, but clearly it could potentially be many other corporations or institutions, for avoiding damage to and delivering gain to biodiversity. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Josh and John, for those presentations. I'd like to invite the panel, if they could take their seats. Could we have the projector turned off? Otherwise we're going to blind the panelists. And I'd also then like to invite a good friend of mine, Josh Bishop from WWF Australia, to come up and take the floor as the moderator.
Thank you, Stuart. Just grab a copy of this. I might join the panel if there's a spare seat. No, there it is.
There's one at the back.
This one will work. Where do you go?
I'll space in the side pick.
Water bottles. These microphones.
Yeah, and guys up the back, there's some seats available down the front here now if you want to make yourself more comfortable.
Does this one work? Never turn it on. Turning on might help, yeah?
On the
That works. Okay. Thanks, Stuart. Thanks, John and Tom. I should introduce myself first of all, and I'll stand up so people in the back can see me. I'm Josh Bishop. I work for WWF Australia on markets and business partnerships. And I guess the reason why I've been asked to do this is partly because I was involved in some of the early thinking and development of the Business and Biodiversity Offsets program. And more recently, when I was at IUCN, I was involved in the development and implementation of the IUCN Rio Tinto agreement. So for my sins, I've been drafted into this role here. I think, as John pointed out in his remarks, the devil is in the detail. I think that applies both to the accounting and to the verification process. And I hope we get some probing questions from people in the room on some of those details. Having said that, I think we also need to keep in mind the big picture and some of the broader context for this work. And we have some big picture thinkers here who will help us with that. And let me just briefly introduce the panel. We have, starting directly from my right, your left, William Bullner from the International Finance Corporation. We have Pippa Howard from Fauna and Flora International. Bill Jackson, the CEO of Parks Victoria in Australia. Peter Cunningham, head of Rio Tinto's Health, Safety, Environment and Communities group, I guess you call it. And Stuart McGuinness, one of the global directors at IUCN in the Secretariat. So they will explain a little bit more about themselves when they make their first comments. I just wanted to take advantage of having the microphone and make a couple of comments myself, if I may. Thank you. I think it's just important to bear in mind why we're doing this. And from my perspective, that's because we're losing biodiversity. And there are a range of ethical, social, and economic reasons why we want to stop biodiversity loss. Having said that, we also know there are more and more people in the world, and they aspire to a better life, and that means more development, more resources being produced, extracted of various kinds, more infrastructure, more roads, ports, bridges, more residential development, and all of that is going to likely lead to more loss of biodiversity. This is just a fact of life, no matter what we do to minimize and mitigate. I think the basic idea of NPI, if I can express it this way, is to ask that developers take responsibility for, or are held responsible for their impacts on the environment. In effect, it's just an extension of the polluter pays principle, just long-standing principle underlying environmental law worldwide. And I think another important part of this whole discussion is it's not about cash compensation. Partly that's because we don't know what biodiversity is worth. Some people would say it's priceless. Even if you agree with valuation, it's really hard to put a price on it. And so we look for in-kind compensation. And that's the basis of the NPI approach. Critically, however, that compensation, even if it's not in cash, needs to be commensurate with the damages in some way. Hence all the accounting. With that, I'll shut up and hand over to our esteemed panel. And I'm going to ask each of them briefly, in 3 to 5 minutes, closer to 3 if possible, introduce yourself and explain a little bit how and why your organization is engaged in this debate around NPI. So we can just hand along the microphone, and then you don't have to hear me anymore.
Okay, so it's me first. Well, good morning, everybody. As Josh said, my name is Bill Bullner. I'm Director of the Environment, Social and Governance Department in IFC. And although I had a stint, I was actually a manager in charge of what we call our investment support group in the Environment Department when we produced the performance standards back in 2006. I then left and actually ran our mining investment business for 4.5 years as the director of the department when we were doing the update of the performance standards. So I know quite a bit of the story that we had behind the original performance standards, and I think it's fair to say that the performance standard that we were most unhappy with when we finished after the 2004-2005 preparation was performance standard 6. We just did not get the goal that we wanted to achieve, and that is our ability through performance standard 6 at the time to help clients work in conditions where they were near or in sensitive habitats to achieve better biodiversity outcomes. And we felt that with that old performance standard, we really just did not get there. It was the last performance standard that was finished, and as I say, there was naturally a lot of satisfaction that we actually got the thing finished at the end of the day, but there was clearly a recognition that it was almost obsolete by the time we released it. And so in 2008, negotiations started, or consultations, on an updated performance standard, up to 2 years afterwards, and we had a 3-year consultation process. And the performance standard that was most rewritten compared to all of them was Performance Standard 6. And the changes are pretty significant. And the key parts of those changes in this aspect were clearly a requirement for the mitigation hierarchy, the net positive impact on working in critical habitats, but also a clear requirement in terms of ongoing monitoring. So this was very consistent with the overall approach of the performance standards and a focus on management, active management of an issue to enhance or minimize impacts so that we could achieve very, very specific goals. We have found that that has been obviously with a very small team of people within IFC, but with a system